Another Napa Valley barbecue, just what I needed. Sun scorching, cousins preening, the usual charade. Lexi, still pushing papers? Brandon asked, beer sloshing in his hand. Must be nice, the steady paycheck. Unlike us taking risks building things. Tiffany, perched on a picnic table, chimed in, at least someone in the family is practical. They had no idea. 34. Single, San Francisco condo with a view. The paper-pushing gig. That's a convenient cover. I'm Lexi Sterling and I control Sterling Ventures. We're a private equity firm. Right now, we're poised to acquire, well them, Brandon and Tiffany. Their companies, they're so clueless. They're about to be my biggest payday. And the irony, delicious. 8 years ago, the reading of grandfather's will. The family home in Atherton, the coveted tech investments, all went to them. Me. An old real estate office in downtown Sacramento, and a modest trust. Scraps, they'd whispered. Brandon practically choked on his champagne when the lawyer read it. Tiffany just rolled her eyes. They were right, or so they thought. That scrap of an office, it was the foundation. It came with mineral rights, water claims. My grandfather knew something they didn't. The true value lay beneath the surface, not in fleeting tech trends. Those assets, now worth millions, fueled my first acquisitions. I remember the Sunday afternoons. Grandfather teaching me to read a balance sheet, the power of patience. Be powerful, Lexi, he'd say, don't look powerful. His words, my guiding principle. The initial sting was real. The pitying glances, the hushed conversations. But the resentment, it became fuel. The decision to stay silent solidified during those early days. I'd secured my first major deal, a small chain of laundromats. I could have told them. But the satisfaction of seeing their condescending remarks, knowing their ignorance was the best revenge. I kept the secret. The early days were tough. Long hours, ramen for dinner. But the thrill of the deal, the quiet acquisition of assets that kept me going. My first success was a small, failing brewery in Portland. Bought it for pennies on the dollar, restructured, and sold it for a 5x return. The family just saw another slow week for Lexi. My quiet empire began to grow. I built Sterling Ventures using shell corporations, blind trusts. No one knew the truth, not even my closest friends. I was a ghost in the business world. It was lonely at times, but the anonymity afforded me the freedom to operate without the scrutiny of my family. I outmaneuvered the competition, often using their own arrogance against them. The annual family gathering, the catalyst moment. Brandon and Tiffany, basking in the glow of their supposed success. They were boasting about their upcoming deals with a leading private equity firm. They didn't even know the name. The tension in the room was palpable as I listened to their boasts. Their companies were teetering on the edge. Sterling Ventures had been quietly circling, watching, waiting. Now I had a decision to make. The time to reveal myself was drawing near. I was ready. The next morning at Sterling Ventures headquarters, I called a full staff meeting. The polished mahogany table, the panoramic view of the city, all the trappings of success, the ones they'd never believed I possessed. Brandon and Tiffany, eyes wide with a mixture of anticipation and arrogance, sat across from me. Before we get started, I announced, my voice calm, I have a bit of news. I watched their faces, the color draining from them. I am Lexi Sterling, founder and CEO of Sterling Ventures. The silence was deafening. Brandon's jaw dropped. Tiffany's carefully applied lipstick seemed to smudge. They were stunned, their faces a perfect tableau of disbelief. You, Brandon stammered, but you're just Lexi. Their entire world, built on assumptions of their own superiority, had just imploded. A few frantic texts and emails later, their families arrived, drawn by panic. I gestured to a screen displaying a complex web of holding companies, subsidiaries, and assets. Sterling Ventures currently manages over $500 million in assets, I stated, the numbers echoing in the suddenly hushed room. Our portfolio includes holdings in real estate, technology, renewable energy, and, as it happens, a controlling interest in your companies. Their parents, the same ones who'd once clucked with pity, were now speechless. My mother, who had always pressured me to settle down and find a real career, could only manage a strained smile. Brandon and Tiffany, their earlier bravado completely gone, were suddenly begging. Lexi, please, Brandon pleaded, we can fix this. We can turn things around. I had prepared a detailed merger document. We'll restructure. I said, my voice devoid of emotion. Brandon, you'll be an advisor. Tiffany, you'll oversee marketing. The terms were harsh but necessary. Their companies were failing. My control, however, was absolute. The family dynamics shifted. The backhanded comments ceased. The pitying glances were replaced with a grudging respect and even a hint of fear. The fallout was swift. Brandon and Tiffany, humbled and demoted, were forced to navigate a new reality. My mother finally understood that my paper pushing was just a front, a clever disguise. The family gatherings were awkward, but now the focus was on my accomplishments. Yet, despite the validation, a sense of unease settled in. The triumph was mine, but the cost was high. I felt the weight of my new power. I still kept my grandfather's old real estate office. It's a physical reminder of where it all began, of the lessons he taught me. I'd go there to feel grounded, to remember the journey. I realized the driving force wasn't vengeance, but a deeper need. I'd craved recognition and validation, not just for myself, but for the potential my grandfather always saw in me. The sweetest success was victory on my own terms. I sat in my grandfather's old office, the scent of aged paper and wood lingering in the air. His words echoed in my mind, "Be powerful, Lexi, not to look powerful." I finally understood. I had become powerful not just by building a financial empire, but by staying true to my values. And in the end, that was enough. The invitation arrived a week before the annual Sterling family Christmas Eve gathering. It was formal, embossed, and addressed to Ms. Alexis Sterling. Inside, a handwritten note from my mother, "Please, dear, bring a date, and try to look nice." The note felt like another subtle jab. Another attempt to subtly remind me of what I lacked in their eyes. I had no intention of bringing a date. I had a board meeting to run, a portfolio to manage, and a life that, while complex, was precisely what I wanted. But I knew what was coming: the barrage of questions, the veiled criticisms, the pitying glances. I considered canceling, but I knew that wouldn't be a solution, just a postponement. I spent the week preparing, not for the party, but for the aftermath of the reveal. I reviewed the merger documents, ensuring every detail was perfect. I had a team of lawyers, accountants, and advisors on standby, ready to manage the fallout. I even rehearsed the presentation, perfecting the delivery, the tone. On Christmas Eve, I drove to Atherton. The mansion was a gaudy display of wealth, a testament to my cousin's perceived success. The air crackled with forced cheer and unspoken tension. As I walked through the front door, I knew the night would be more than just a family gathering. It would be a battlefield. As soon as I entered, the inquiries started. "So, Lexi, still single?" Tiffany asked, her voice dripping with false concern. "And what are you doing these days?" Brandon chimed in. "Still pushing papers," I smiled, playing my part. "Oh, I said, the usual." The irony was almost unbearable. Their arrogance, their ignorance fueled my resolve. This time, their world would shatter. The evening progressed, the tension steadily mounting. Champagne flowed, small talk droned on, and the family members, oblivious to the chaos about to unfold, continued their chatter. Brandon and Tiffany, flush with holiday cheer, were holding court in the living room, regaling a group with their success stories. I watched them, my fingers toying with the single diamond earring I wore, a gift from my grandfather. It was a small detail, a reminder of the past, and the power that lay within quiet strength. The same power I was about to unleash. Later, over Christmas dinner, I watched them. Brandon was regaling the family with his latest triumph. Tiffany was adding details. The family was eating it up. I took a breath, then stood. All eyes turned to me. It was time. "Actually," I began, my voice cutting through the noise, "there's something I need to share." A hush fell over the room. Brandon and Tiffany stopped talking. The smiles on their faces faltered. "About your new venture," I continued, my gaze sweeping across the room. "Sterling Ventures has been watching, and we're very interested." I took a sip of water, the silence thick. Then I said the words that would change everything. "I am Lexi Sterling, and I am the CEO of Sterling Ventures." The room erupted. Brandon choked on his wine. Tiffany's face went white, her meticulously crafted smile crumbling like a dry leaf. You, Brandon sputtered, pointing a trembling finger at me. He looked like he'd been physically struck. Tiffany, for once, was speechless, her mouth hanging open in a silent O. Their parents exchanged horrified glances. their carefully constructed facades of superiority cracking under the weight of the revelation. Chaos erupted. Questions flew, accusations were hurled. Brandon's father, a blustering man who'd always dismissed me as a dilettante, turned crimson, his face contorted in rage. "This is some kind of joke?" he roared. Tiffany's mother, usually the picture of serene control, was frantically whispering to her husband, her voice barely audible above the din. I remained calm, a stark contrast to the pandemonium around me. I'd seen this coming. The initial shock, the disbelief, the desperate attempt to regain control. I simply watched them. I watched them suffer the first blows of my quiet vengeance. "Lexi, explain yourself," my mother demanded, her voice sharper than I'd ever heard it. Her eyes, usually filled with a gentle concern, were now assessing, calculating. The shift in her gaze was palpable. "It's not a joke," I said, my voice steady, cutting through the chaos. "Sterling Ventures is a private equity firm. We've been following your companies for some time." I gestured to a nearby screen, which displayed a complex organizational chart. "And, as of this morning, we are now the majority shareholders." The screen displayed the intricate web of holding companies, subsidiaries, and assets that made up my empire. The depth and breadth of my holdings were now laid bare. Brandon and Tiffany's companies, once symbols of their perceived success, were just a small fraction of my control. Brandon let out a strangled cry. Tiffany, her face a mask of disbelief and shame, sank into a chair. How could you?" she whispered, the arrogance that had always defined her completely gone. "Because I saw what you didn't," I replied, my voice devoid of emotion. "I saw the potential, I saw the opportunity, and frankly, I saw the arrogance." I laid out the terms of the merger. Brandon and Tiffany would be demoted to advisory roles, their decisions subject to strict oversight. Their parents were forced to acknowledge my power, their earlier disdain replaced with a mixture of awe and grudging respect. The immediate aftermath was a blur of legal proceedings, negotiations, and family meetings. Brandon and Tiffany, stripped of their power, were forced to adapt to their new reality. Their friends offered hollow condolences. My mother, finally understanding the scope of my success, was cautiously supportive, her earlier criticisms replaced with a tentative pride. But the sweetest victory wasn't seeing their downfall. It was the validation. The recognition that I was no longer the paper-pushing cousin, but a force to be reckoned with. Acknowledgement. I had won. But as time passed, I realized the cost. The joy of the win was mixed with a growing sadness. The family dynamic had changed. I was isolated. The new reality felt hollow. Months later, I sat in my grandfather's old real estate office, the familiar scent of aged paper and wood comforting. The weight of my responsibility, the loneliness of my success, settled over me. I ran my fingers along the rough surface of the desk, remembering his words. "Be powerful, Lexi, not to look powerful." I had proven myself, I had won, but at what cost? I closed my eyes, and I smiled. The sweetest success in the end was victory on my own terms. The Sterling family Christmas gatherings continued, forever changed. The whispers and side glances were gone, replaced by a strained politeness. Brandon and Tiffany, humbled, made a habit of seeking my advice, their earlier bravado replaced with a cautious deference. Their parents, once dismissive, now sent me elaborate gifts on my birthday, attempting to bridge the chasm that had grown between us. My mother, still a bit awkward, would call, offering invitations to lunch and asking about my investments. One day, she mentioned a cousin's daughter, a recent graduate with potential. I knew what she meant. The family, once united in their condescension, was now vying for my favor. I found myself increasingly isolated. The burden of my power was heavy. I attended board meetings. I made strategic decisions. But the genuine connection with my family was gone. The secret was out, and the trust was broken. I missed the freedom of anonymity, the quiet satisfaction of outmaneuvering my cousins. The whispers were gone, but the emptiness remained. Years passed. I was at a charity gala. Brandon and Tiffany were there, acting as if everything was normal. I saw my mother talking to a group of potential investors, touting my accomplishments. "My daughter," she said, "is a very shrewd businesswoman." I heard the pride in her voice. As I stood there, I realized what I was missing. The authentic connection to my roots, the shared experience, the carefree days of my childhood. I made a choice. I sold the majority of my stake in the family businesses, setting up a foundation for the community with the funds. I kept the old real estate office, and I returned to my roots. I focused on smaller, local acquisitions. I learned to balance my professional life with the needs of the community. I saw Brandon and Tiffany at a farmer's market, where I bought a few organic vegetables. They were attempting to start a new business. I smiled. They may never fully understand the essence of my success. I finally felt free. The invitations to family gatherings continued, though the atmosphere had shifted. The blatant condescension had vanished, replaced by a guarded deference, a careful dance around the subject of my wealth and power. Brandon and Tiffany were noticeably subdued, their boasting replaced with a hesitant eagerness to please, a stark contrast to their earlier arrogance. Their parents, once so dismissive, now sent thoughtful gifts, subtly seeking my approval. My mother, while proud, still struggled to reconcile her image of me with the reality of my success. The conversations felt stilted, the laughter forced. There was a tangible tension, a lingering awkwardness that never fully dissipated. The practical changes were immediate and pervasive. My phone buzzed constantly with inquiries, from distant relatives seeking financial advice to old acquaintances suddenly remembering our shared history. The requests for favors, the invitations to exclusive events, the subtle attempts to curry favor it was overwhelming. I became a focal point, a symbol of success, a target for opportunists. The simple pleasure of anonymity was gone, replaced by the constant awareness of scrutiny. I hired a personal assistant to manage the deluge of requests, filtering the calls and emails, creating a buffer between me and the outside world. I learned to be strategic about my time, carefully choosing the people and projects I wanted to prioritize. I found myself becoming more guarded, less open, protecting myself from the constant demands on my attention. My relationships changed in unexpected ways. My closest friends, those who knew me before the revelation, remained steadfast. We navigated the changes together, their support a lifeline in the turbulent wake of my success. But even those friendships were tested. The dynamics shifted, the balance of power altered. Some relationships, unable to withstand the strain, simply withered. The complexity of the newfound attention was unsettling. The genuine admiration was often overshadowed by the subtle manipulations, the attempts to exploit my success for personal gain. I had to learn to discern the true intentions of those around me, to filter the flattery, to recognize the hidden agendas. I started spending more time at the old real estate office, a physical anchor to my past. It was a refuge, a place where I could escape the pressures of my current life, where I could reconnect with the values my grandfather had instilled in me. One evening, I was sitting at my grandfather's desk, reviewing the books for a new acquisition. The phone rang. It was Brandon. He was calling to ask if I could invest in his newest venture. I paused, considering. He was still grasping for the power he'd lost. "I'll take a look at your proposal," I said. "But understand this, Brandon, it's not about family, it's about the business." I knew, in that moment, the journey was far from over. The challenges of wielding power were constant, ever evolving. I also knew that the choice was mine. How I chose to wield it would determine my future and the legacy I'd leave. The Napa sun, now a hazy memory, seemed a lifetime away. In the silence of my grandfather's office, the scent of aged wood and faded ambition filled the air. I traced the worn surface of his desk, the ghost of his hand guiding mine. What had I gained? Financial security, yes, respect of a sort. But I'd also lost something precious, the freedom of being underestimated, the quiet satisfaction of the underdog. The world saw Lexi Sterling, CEO, a woman of power. But I knew the cost. The genuine connection to my family, the simple joy of shared experiences, replaced by a carefully constructed facade. The silence of the secret had been replaced by the noise of expectation. And yet, I sat here, in the heart of this modest office, the foundation upon which I had built my empire. The mineral rights, the water claims, and the lessons of patience and quiet control that my grandfather instilled in me. It wasn't about vengeance, it was about validation. The sweetest success was the victory I secured on my own terms. The journey had brought me here. I had learned how power could be both a shield and a prison. I realized that the greatest freedom was not in the control of others, but in the control of oneself. I had found a different sort of victory, the victory of a life lived. Consider your own story. Have you ever been underestimated? Misunderstood? Have you ever found yourself walking a path unseen by those around you? What choices did you make? What sacrifices did you accept? Where do you stand now?